Elijah tightened the straps on his faded backpack as he stepped into the echoing community center. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, buzzing like a swarm of restless bees. Rows of folding chairs were filled with neighbors. Some he knew by face, others by their judgmental stares. He walked with a quiet confidence, wearing worn-out sneakers and a jacket 2 sizes too big. Some of the younger men in the back snickered as he passed, elbowing each other and whispering behind cupped hands. Elijah caught a few words. Who let him in? Waste of time. Fool. Pretending not to hear, he found a seat near the front. His heart pounded against his ribs, but he kept his head high. He wasn't here to impress them with flashy clothes or big talk. He was here because he believed their broken, forgotten neighborhood could be something more. The meeting began with the usual noise. Complaints about potholes, arguments over funding, empty promises thrown around like confetti. Elijah waited patiently, tapping his worn notebook with a chewed-up pen. When the moderator finally asked if anyone had suggestions for community improvement, Elijah stood up. A few chuckles rose from the back. Someone muttered, "Here we go," loud enough for half the room to hear. Elijah cleared his throat. "I have an idea," he began, voice steady but low. "What if we rebuilt the old park? Clean it up, fix the swings, repaint the courts." Before he could finish, a man in a polished suit laughed out loud. Others followed. The sound filled the room, bouncing off the cracked walls and sinking into Elijah's chest like stones. He paused, swallowing the heat rising in his face. They didn't even hear him out. To them, he was just another fool dreaming too big for a place that had long given up on dreams. Still, Elijah stayed standing, refusing to sit down. Deep in his gut, he knew something they didn't. Every great change starts with someone everybody doubts. And tonight, that someone was him. The laughter still clung to the air when Elijah slowly lowered himself back into his chair. His palms were sweaty against the cheap metal arms, but he kept his gaze forward, refusing to show even a flicker of hurt. The moderator, trying to hide a smirk, cleared his throat. "Thank you for your enthusiasm, Elijah," he said, tapping his papers sharply against the podium. "Any other ideas?" Several hands shot up at once, eager to steer the conversation away from Elijah's foolishness. A woman suggested a new shopping plaza. A man proposed adding security cameras on every street corner. Each idea was greeted with polite nods or mild applause. No one mentioned Elijah's plan again. It was as if he had never spoken. Still, as the meeting rolled on, Elijah's mind refused to let it go. The park isn't just a playground, he thought. It's where kids could feel safe, where families could gather, where the neighborhood could breathe again. At the back of the room, 2 teenagers laughed loud enough to turn heads. One mime swinging a hammer, the other pretended to slip and fall dramatically, making a mockery of Elijah's idea of rebuilding the park. A ripple of giggles moved through their little corner. Elijah shifted in his seat, his heart hammered with a mix of embarrassment and anger. But he stayed. He stayed because walking out would mean agreeing with them, that he was a joke, a fool. When the meeting finally adjourned, people gathered in clumps, chattering and laughing. As Elijah made his way toward the exit, a voice called out behind him. "Hey, dreamer," someone said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Elijah paused but didn't turn around. He kept walking, head high, back straight, because deep down, he understood something powerful. It's easy to laugh at someone standing alone. It's much harder to laugh when that someone builds something worth standing for. The door to Elijah's tiny apartment creaked as he pushed it open. The place smelled faintly of old wood and coffee, the 2 things that filled his life more than anything else lately. He dropped his backpack by the door, kicked off his worn sneakers, and collapsed onto the threadbare couch. For a long moment, he just sat there, staring at the cracked ceiling. The weight of the evening pressed down on him, every smirk, every laugh, every whispered insult. It was one thing to be doubted in private, it was another to be mocked in front of an entire room. Elijah leaned forward and rested his head in his hands. "Why did I even bother?" he thought bitterly. "They'll never take me seriously. Maybe I'm just fooling myself." But then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw it, the small, worn photograph pinned above his couch. It was his grandmother, Miss Louise, smiling with that fire in her eyes that could melt through stone. He got up slowly and walked over to it, fingers brushing the edges of the photo like it was a sacred treasure. He could almost hear her voice, strong and steady in his mind. "The stone they reject, Elijah, will be the cornerstone. Don't you dare let them steal your fire." A lump formed in his throat, but he straightened his shoulders. Miss Louise hadn't raised him to crumble at the first sign of laughter. She had taught him that real strength wasn't in shouting louder than your enemies. It was in standing tall when your knees wanted to buckle. He sat down at his wobbly kitchen table, pulled out his notebook, and began to sketch. Plans for the park, ideas for rallying volunteers, lists of supplies he would need. The world outside thought he was a fool. That was fine. Fools were the ones crazy enough to change the world. The morning sun barely peeked over the rooftops as Elijah dragged a battered wheelbarrow across the cracked sidewalk. Inside it were a few tools he'd borrowed, an old rake, a bent shovel, a pair of rusty clippers. Nothing fancy, nothing powerful, but it was enough to start. When he reached the abandoned park, Elijah stopped and looked around. It was worse than he remembered. Rusted swings dangled by a single chain. The basketball court was more weeds than concrete. Broken glass glittered in the grass like cruel diamonds. A heavy breeze carried the sharp smell of decay. He set the wheelbarrow down with a thud and pulled on a pair of torn gloves. One piece at a time, he told himself. One day at a time. At first, no one noticed him. People hurried by on their way to work, barely giving him a second glance. Some kids passed, tossing candy wrappers on the ground without a care. Elijah didn't react. He just kept working, raking up garbage, pulling weeds, gathering broken bottles into trash bags. Hours passed. His back ached. His hands blistered. His clothes were streaked with dirt and sweat. But every time he thought about quitting, he heard Miss Louise's voice in his mind. "Don't you dare let them steal your fire." By noon, a small patch of the park looked almost livable. The grass was visible again. The broken swings were removed. The site was small, almost laughably small compared to the mess still surrounding it. But it was something. It was the seed of a dream planted in soil most people had already given up on. Across the street, a few kids leaned against a fence, watching him with wide, curious eyes. They didn't laugh. They didn't mock. They just watched. Elijah gave a small nod toward them, then turned back to work, a slow smile creeping onto his face. Maybe they didn't believe yet, but someday they would. The next morning, Elijah woke before sunrise, excitement pulling him from bed faster than any alarm clock could. He stuffed a sandwich into his backpack, grabbed his gloves, and practically jogged the 6 blocks to the park. He imagined how it would look today, the tiny clean patch he fought so hard for, maybe even a little bigger. Maybe those kids from yesterday would join him. Maybe the dream was finally starting to grow. But the moment Elijah turned the corner and saw the park, he stopped dead in his tracks. His stomach dropped. His mouth went dry. The trash was back, 10 times worse than before. Spray paint covered the swings and benches, splattered across the ground in angry, ugly words. Fool. Waste. Quit now. The bags he had filled with broken glass were torn open and scattered like a cruel joke. The tiny area he had cleared was now a bigger mess than when he started. For a long moment, Elijah just stood there, frozen. The early morning breeze tugged at his jacket, but he barely felt it. All the laughter from the meeting rang in his ears again. All the doubts he fought so hard to silence roared back, louder than ever. Maybe they're right, he thought. Maybe it's hopeless. He dropped to his knees in the dirt, his hands trembling as he picked up a smashed soda can. Around him, the neighborhood stirred to life. People heading to work, kids dragging backpacks to school, nobody stopping, nobody noticing, or so he thought. Out of the corner of his eye, Elijah saw a small shadow move closer. He turned and found Malik, the same boy who had watched him yesterday, standing a few feet away. Malik's eyes were wide but serious. In his hand, he held a broom. Without a word, the boy stepped into the wreckage and began sweeping broken glass into a pile. Elijah blinked, fighting the lump in his throat. The world might still laugh at him. The world might still call him a fool. But right now, in this broken little corner of the city, someone had chosen to believe. And that was enough to make Elijah rise to his feet and start again. It started with just Malik. Every day after school, he showed up at the park with his broom, his dustpan, his gloves. He worked quietly, cleaning up what he could, and sometimes even pulling weeds when there was nothing else to do. But soon other kids began to notice. It wasn't much at first. A teenager named Jamal stopped by to help haul away some of the bigger trash bags. Then Mrs. Jones, the mother of 2 young girls, came by with a bucket of soapy water to wash the graffiti off the benches. Each day, someone new came by, hesitant at first, unsure if they were crazy for believing Elijah's little vision could work. One Saturday afternoon, as Elijah was digging up a stubborn patch of weeds by the basketball court, he heard footsteps. He turned and saw a tall man, Mr. Thompson, the local barber, walking toward him with a spade in his hand. "Thought I'd help out," Mr. Thompson said with a shrug, offering the spade to Elijah. "Got some extra time today. My boys are around the corner fixing that fence, and I figured I'd pitch in." Elijah blinked, speechless for a moment. You're here to help?" Mr. Thompson grinned. "Why not? You got people laughing at you now, but when this park starts looking good, you'll get the last laugh." Elijah couldn't help the smile that spread across his face. There was something about Mr. Thompson's words that felt like a spark of hope, something that was finally starting to catch fire. Soon more people showed up. An older woman from down the street, Ms. Gladys, arrived with bags of mulch. 2 young men, fresh from a construction job, volunteered to patch up the cracked basketball court. The work began to multiply. More hands meant more progress. Elijah stood back for a moment, watching them all. He had started alone, but now he had an army. The dream was no longer his alone. As they worked, the sounds of laughter and conversation filled the park. And for the first time in weeks, Elijah allowed himself to believe this could really happen. Weeks passed. The park was beginning to change, but it wasn't just the physical space, it was the people around it. The neighborhood, once full of doubt, was slowly waking up, just like the little corner of land Elijah had fought to save. The children started playing in the newly cleaned playground. The basketball court, though still cracked, saw more and more hopeful games. The trash piles had diminished, replaced by vibrant flowers and new plants. But the real victory came on a Saturday morning, when the local news station showed up. Elijah had no idea how they found out. He had been busy digging up a stubborn stump in the far corner of the park when a woman's voice called out to him. "Excuse me, are you Elijah Carter?" He looked up to see a reporter standing by the edge of the park, a cameraman adjusting his gear behind her. The reporter smiled brightly. "We heard about the work you've been doing here," she said, a little breathless. "Would you mind if we did a story about it? We think it's incredible how this neighborhood is coming together." Elijah stood frozen for a moment. The words that people had used to mock him, fool, waste, dreamer, seemed to hang in the air like ghosts. But as he looked around the park, at the kids on the swings, the families sitting on benches, the people working together, it didn't feel like a joke anymore. A smile tugged at his lips. "Yeah, I'd be happy to," Elijah said, his voice steady, despite the whirlwind inside him. The cameras rolled, and Elijah spoke about what they'd achieved. He told them about the first day he picked up a broom, about Malik and Ms. Gladys and Mr. Thompson. He talked about how everyone had come together to build something bigger than themselves. By the time the report aired that evening, the story had gone viral. The neighborhood that had once been ignored, laughed at, and dismissed was now the center of attention. People across the city were inspired by Elijah's determination, by the strength of the community he had rallied. For the first time, Elijah didn't feel like a fool. The day after the news story aired, Elijah woke to a flurry of phone calls. His phone buzzed relentlessly on the kitchen counter, the screen flashing with texts, notifications, and unknown numbers. The first message came from Mrs. Thompson, the school principal, offering her support. Then there was a message from the mayor's office, asking if Elijah was willing to meet to discuss potential partnership opportunities. But the most surprising call came from a construction company that had seen the news. The owner, a tall man with a deep voice, introduced himself as Mr. Williams. He told Elijah that they'd seen the story about the park and wanted to help, offering both labor and materials to repair the basketball court properly. "We'll bring in our crew," "Free of charge," Mr. Williams had said, "and we'll make sure it's done right. You've got something special going on, Elijah." Elijah sat there stunned, the words almost too much to process. People, real people, were offering to help. And they weren't just offering empty promises. They were showing up with tangible resources. That afternoon, a team of workers from Mr. Williams' company arrived, ready to tear up the cracked concrete and lay down fresh asphalt for the basketball court. At the same time, the local community center promised to host free after-school programs in the park, using the newly rebuilt space as a safe place for kids to gather. The local library even donated books for a little reading corner under the newly planted trees. Elijah couldn't believe it. He had always thought change could only come slowly and only from the ground up. But now it seemed the whole city was beginning to wake up, to see the potential in this small, forgotten corner of their world. As the workers began to move in, Elijah took a step back, watching them, the weight of it all sinking in. His little vision was no longer a foolish dream. It was becoming reality, and there was no turning back now. It was a crisp evening, the kind of evening that felt like the city itself was holding its breath. The park had transformed over the past few weeks. The basketball court gleamed with fresh paint, the playground equipment sparkled in the fading sunlight, and the community center's doors were open, welcoming kids who'd never stepped foot in the park before. Families gathered, their laughter mingling with the distant hum of traffic. But as Elijah walked through the crowd, he spotted them. The same group of skeptics from the early meetings. They had arrived, watching from a distance, their faces clouded with doubt and confusion. Some of them were shaking their heads, muttering under their breath, clearly unsure of what they were seeing. It wasn't the first time Elijah had noticed their cold stares. At first, he'd kept his distance, choosing not to engage with those who'd called his vision foolish. But today was different. Today, Elijah walked straight toward them, his head held high, his steps firm. One of the men, Mr. Carlson, the same one who had mocked him the most during the town hall, spotted him first. "Well, well," Mr. Carlson said, sneering as he wiped his hand on his pants. "Look at this. You actually did something." Elijah stopped a few feet away, his eyes meeting Mr. Carlson's with a quiet strength. "Yeah," he said, his voice calm but unwavering. "I did. And look around you. It's not just me, it's everyone. You think this is just me doing this? This is a whole community working together to turn things around. The only difference between you and me is I didn't give up." For a long moment, Mr. Carlson didn't say anything. His eyes flicked around the park, taking in the laughter of children, the families enjoying the sun, the workers repairing the benches, the coaches organizing a game. Slowly, the sneer faded from his face. "We were wrong," Mr. Carlson muttered, almost under his breath, but loud enough for Elijah to hear. Elijah didn't smile. He just nodded. "It's okay. Sometimes it takes people a while to believe." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving behind the men who had once doubted him, now forced to confront the reality of their mistake. The park was no longer a place of broken promises. It was a symbol of what could happen when one person refused to be ignored. The sun was setting on the grand reopening day, casting a warm golden glow across the newly renovated park. A long line of people stretched from the entrance to the basketball court, each of them eager to be a part of something bigger than themselves. The park, once a forgotten wasteland, now buzzed with life. Tables with food and drinks lined the path, and the community center had set up a booth with flyers for after-school programs. Children ran past, laughing, their eyes wide with excitement as they tested out the new swings and climbing structures. A group of teenagers were already in a heated game of basketball on the freshly paved court, the sound of the ball bouncing and sneakers squeaking filling the air. Elijah stood at the entrance, watching it all unfold, his heart swelling with pride. He had come so far, from being the town's fool to the leader of a movement that had transformed the entire neighborhood. As he stood there, people began to notice him, nodding, waving, and offering thanks. Mrs. Thompson, the school principal, was the first to approach him, a broad smile on her face. "You did it, Elijah. I didn't think it was possible, but look at this. Look at what you've built." Elijah gave a modest smile. "It wasn't just me. It was everyone. We're all part of this." Before Mrs. Thompson could respond, a young girl, no older than 8, ran up to him, her eyes bright. "Thank you for fixing the park, Mr. Elijah. I can't wait to play here every day," she said, her voice full of excitement. Elijah crouched down to her level, smiling. "You're welcome. This park is yours now, too. I hope you'll take care of it." As he watched the kids running through the park, his thoughts drifted back to the early days when it felt like no one believed in him. They had called him a fool, but now, standing in the middle of the park, surrounded by the community he had helped build, Elijah knew one thing for sure. Sometimes the biggest fools are the ones who change the world. And as the crowd gathered for the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Elijah stood at the front, cutting the ribbon with a steady hand. The cheers that followed were not just for the park, but for the hope, unity, and strength that had blossomed from the ground up.